Hello, I'm Lucy Anne Jennings. And just in case you'd like to know a little more about me, I've put together some pictures to show you who I am and what makes me be me. The first ancestor that I know about is Waldo Gluck. He lived in the 1600s and was a pickpocket and generally a bad guy. If there was something bad, he was probably part of it. Now, to tell the truth, Waldo Gluck isn't even a true story. My father made him up to keep up with all the stories my mother has about her family. And my mother thought it would be pretty fun to paint a picture of what she thought Waldo Gluck looked like. And she even made a crest for him. To tell the truth, I think he looks like one of my brothers. Here's my mother's family. My mother's great-grandfather was Lord Brereton of Wales. I understand he had a castle and could have been a very rich man, but he decided he wanted to leave his family and go to the United States to be a Shakespearean actor. Lord Brereton died in a sad way. He was hit by a platter in a play that didn't break away, and he died. His son became a fireman, and he also died by something hitting his head while he was fighting a fire. And this is Lord Brereton's daughter, Winifred Johnson. She played the banjo and traveled the world doing vaudeville with her husband, R.G. Knowles. R.G. Knowles was a very famous comedian and one of W.C. Fields' close friends. From what I've heard about W.C. Fields and his friends, I'm not sure if that was good or not. R.G. Knowles wrote a book about all of his travels, and in that book he said that his favorite niece was my Grandma Winnie, Winifred Johnson. My grandmother was named after her Aunt Winnie, and this is a picture of her as a little girl in the early 1900s. My mother was the oldest, and she's in the middle. Uncle Brett was named after Lord Brereton, the Shakespearean actor. Uncle Brett was one of the pioneers of computers. He was there when one computer took up an entire wall. Aunt Janie married Jim Henson, and together they created the Muppets. She died in 2013, and that was too soon. She brought so much happiness through her puppetry and art. This is the only picture that I have of my father when he was young. My father, to me, could do anything. My father wanted to get as far away from the city as possible. And so, he found Needles, California. You might have heard of Needles before. It used to be very famous for being the hottest place in the country. So Needles was just what my dad was looking for. Needles is so hot and so isolated, who would want to live there? Perfect for my dad. He always told me that's just what he wanted. Needles could never grow big. Now, you might not think much about living in the middle of the desert, and it might sound a little ironic, but our whole life was centered around water, the Colorado River. To me, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I haven't been all over the world, but I have been to the Grand Canyon, and to me, Topok Gorge is a little mini Grand Canyon. So I've always been drawn to water, not in the way most people think of, like going to the beach and listening to the waves. To me, when I needed to think, I go down to the river and watch the water float by. After they settled in Needles, finally, I came along. And these are a few pictures of me when I was little. Once in a while, my Uncle Jimmy would come through, and I remembered this when he brought Rolf with him. I just remember he was so big and soft, and of course, I was always shy. My father was an artist. He painted these pictures right after the war when he was in Germany. He didn't have a family, and so he was one of the later soldiers to come back. So after the war, he just traveled around, waiting to get to come back. My mother mostly did portraits. She painted a lot of other things, but she was mostly known in town for her portraits. If I'd go to someone's house, there was often a portrait on the wall that I never had seen before, but they had had my mother do for them. And pretty soon I came along and there started to be paintings of me. I was always the curly head. Now, I thought you might be interested in some things I did when I was little. I don't have much, but I do have a pad from when I was probably about 7. And here's a little bit more of my art. I learned to weave in college and have accumulated a studio filled with looms, yarn, fabric, and just about anything related to fiber. If you look in the picture in the background, it's the dollhouse my father made for my daughter Cherry when she was 3. He made a dollhouse for every single one of his granddaughters. A lot of the equipment in that studio was made by my father. You can hardly see it, but there's a spinning wheel, and he made me another big spinning wheel. So many things that I have, I could never have afforded them, and my father made them for me when I was learning to weave. I went to school in northern Arizona, and I was very lucky to have a weaving teacher who was quite well known in the country. Her name was Mary Pendleton, and she kind of took me under her wing. I even worked for her for a little while. I thought I wanted to run a weaving shop, but I soon decided, it really wasn't for me. I wanted to teach kids. This is my father in his workshop. He's building the first loom that I ever had. And over to the left is a picture of my mom and my dad at my master's show when I got my master's degree in art education. I used to have home shows in which I'd fix my studio all up and put my things out for people to come and buy. Now that was a lot of work, so I stopped doing that after about 5 years. And I spent quite a few years doing outdoor craft shows and indoor craft shows. They're a lot of work too, but they're a lot of fun. A long time ago, I started putting a lot of beadwork into my weavings, and then the next thing you know, I started making jewelry. And then the next thing you know, I started making my own beads. My work has also been featured in national magazines. This is when I was in Handwoven magazine in 1986. I was also in the Weaver's Journal. This is a sample of some of the beads I made. I really enjoyed making lampwork beads. One of my favorite things to make was little fairies. I made a lot of petroglyph beads too. Now, here's for the best part, my daughter Cherry. This is a picture of her when she was probably around 3 years old, making a great masterpiece. She helped me a lot in the studio. This is her on her first day of school. She was going to kindergarten. That box she has is not a lunch box. That is her very essential supplies. Art supplies, of course. And luckily, she had a wonderful kindergarten teacher that let her use them. Cherry loved horses. This is a picture of her at her Aunt Tinka's. She's growing up. I can't say much about this. Maybe you shouldn't take my advice on how to draw. Cherry seems to have picked up some very peculiar habits. And here's Cherry, pretty grown up. She's in high school now, and she's the drum major of the band. I have to admit, I'm very proud of her. Here's a picture of me with some more of my favorite things in the world. I have a cute little mini horse, and I hope you've seen my story I wrote about Sunny. And then there's Big Bob. Here they are, munching out in the backyard. And here's part of my classroom. The other part has the tables that the kids work at. So, a few years ago, I decided, you know what? I've always wanted to be a children's writer and illustrate the pictures for my stories, so I'd better get practicing drawing again. And here's a class I was taking in Sedona. My hair is messy as usual, but I'm having a good time. And here's me in my living room, working away at my computer. And this is the view from my studio. I guess you could call it my backyard. Well, I have to say, congratulations, you've made it through my whole story. And if you've made it this far, I have to say thank you. And I'll be seeing you soon. Come visit me at Creative Little Readers.